Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. Hello back for this fifth part of the Team War Criminal series. The subject of today is actually something that I promised long ago. I promised it exactly 5 months ago. And it was supposed to be me dunking on a lot of people who had prophesized how the counter was going to go, and that we're supposed to have a summer party in Crimea and shit like that. Okay. We are not going to speak about NAFO. It has no purpose. It has no value. Those people are absolute retards. It doesn't matter to humiliate them. What matters, though, is some of the supposedly more acute and smarter people. Once again, I'm not going to go for the Ben Hodges, the Telenkos, the Hertlings, and all these people were doing PR. They were absolutely stupid. And I mean, I'm pretty sure they knew they were just grifting. Where we are going to go is rather to persons who right now are still clinging to the logic that for some reason the counter isn't done, and that have the perfect copes for it. I was reading, the Black Swan group. Right now, has someone Moscow? No, I didn't throw you up, bro. Come on, join in. I just cut the previous space because it was just a test. I wasn't sure that. Jesus, bro. Just a moment. I need to add a member of the Timor criminal, because that's the funny thing. Apparently, it has become extremely difficult to go back to the basics. Yeah, the spaces are getting extremely complicated, to be honest. Supposedly, I couldn't get in. I couldn't have a space. Then suddenly, I can have a space. So apparently, a member of the Timor criminal group cannot was rejected or something like that. I don't know, guys. I don't know. So I'm gonna add him as an intervenant because I cannot do it otherwise. Sorry, guys. I know that it's a bit unprofessional, but we don't care about professionals. What the fuck? Sorry, I'm really sorry, guys, but it keeps like bouncing him, and I cannot understand. Anyway, I'm going to go straight to the point. Oh, okay, we have a problem. Yeah, I don't know. Moscow, I'm sorry, bro. I literally don't know what the hell's going on. Try again. I cannot do anything more. But it's recorded anyway, so you can listen back to it, and you can come back maybe later. Try it. I don't know if it's limited to something, or I cannot help you on that one. It's not my mean here to eject probably the best guy on the Timor criminal when it comes to level-headed. Even I get sometimes ahead of myself. Moscal Boss, honestly, is probably the most level-headed with Gammon, of course. So, guys, I'm not. I'm sorry about this late situation. Anyway, let's go back to what we said. the problem is there is still a segment of the pro-Ukrainian, would say, support team that thinks that for some reason the country is not over. One of those, and I'm gonna base a lot of this space on him, because actually his points are sustained by a lot of people, and one of the best part is that supposedly the country isn't done. The country isn't done for main reasons, and this and that and this and that. So first of all, he says, like, I already make predictions, blah blah blah, but the counter isn't done because the intensity of the fighting around the areas of the counter is not dropping. Actually, I would start with a definition of trends when you have a offensive action. What matters in a counter is that supposedly you have the initiative. Initiative is everything. And this initiative is pretty simple. One of them is that you are dictating the tempo and the pace of the fight. When you look at Zapo, we have the Russians counterattacking around Pritunia and recovering a large swath of land north of it. We have Russian counters in the Vremensky Ledge, with people getting captured and killed around Urozhanye, which was lost and was, I think, the culmination of the counter, despite the fact that they started to scrap more parts around Robotine. Robotine was already the death throw of the counter, but once Urozhanye was done, there was no more expanse around the area of the Vremensky Ledge. So on South Donbass, it was done. They tried once again around Novodonetsk and Staromayorsk, but it was done. Like, basically, there the counter died at Urozhanye, and Robotine was just inertia, and it kept being inertia. And I explained that on the thread about the fact that the biggest issue for the salient in Robotine is that they didn't have the lines, long enough lines, to be able to actually push on both sides of the counter forceps that they tried to do. And unfortunately, there is where most of the cope from the craziest Ukrainian side is coming. Like, we are not seeing a lack of intensity in the counter. The reality is that, in fact, you can see the same intensity maybe, but right now you don't dictate the tempo, you don't dictate the pace, and also we are back to very early counter when it comes to Ukraine. That means that every single asset they are using, and we spoke about the Leopards around the Kopani Robotine axis. We spoke about the T-64 BVs Ober 17 and 22. And now we saw that they lost another Leopard with a shitbox and a BTR-4E. All these demonstrate as well that there was a swap in the brigades. So the 33rd replaced the 47th, which was sent partially to the Avdiivka front. There, they already lost between 6 and 7 Bradleys, 1 Leopard, and probably a lot more infantry and vehicles on the background. Today I posted a double strike from UMPKs on Tonenke. I also already explained why Tonenke is very important. It's very important because it is in the middle of the resupply lines that the Ukrainians want to hold Avdiivka. But the most important part, it's also the first line of retreat. You probably have already followed the thread over how Avdiivka is shaping up. I said, and I will you don't need to point out copium, hopium on my part. I will always say how the shit is, and I told you since the beginning, pretty much the first and second day, people were still holding on to these absolutely nonsensical statements, allegations that the Russians were already in they were already in Berdishi. That never happened. We saw that they struck Berdishi and they hit it a couple of times as a preparation, but the Russians never made it so far. What we saw, however, is that the attack on Stepove had is very, 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 very important impact because it allowed them to do exactly what didn't happen during the counter. That's the link between Avdiivka and the counter, by the way. That's why I want to go. In Avdiivka, the Russians suffered a lot, pushed forward, but are forcing a situation. Of course, it's a defensive salient, so it is easier, let's say it as it is. It's always easier to attack a defensive salient than to attack an offensive salient. In this case, the A1 is like still going with this nonsense about the intensity hasn't dropped, that there is another front now with the Kherson situation, and the Russians are pressing reserves into battle. Actually, this is the funny part. That's why I wanted to mock a bit A1. For about 4 to 5 months, almost straight away, we heard about the fact that the Russians were getting attrited 10-1. The Russian artillery was 20 a day lost, and so on and so on and so on. It's fine. It's okay. Those big fat lies were what they were. Verified losses actually in Zaporozhye axis, where, as I said since the beginning, ironically very low over the 5 months. So when we check the losses for the Zaporozhye axis when it comes to artillery, actually, yes, there was quite a bit of tube artillery and missile artillery lost, but it was lower than what, according to Oryx, the Russians lose every day as an average. Of course, there are trends. So at the beginning of the war, more fronts, larger gaps, more losses, and now the losses are far lower. This allows, as I said, to have a replenishment rate that's faster, shoot less artillery rounds. FPVs have also taken over, Lancers have also taken over. But the most important part, what was said to us for like 5 months, 4.5 at least, that the Russians already had no more reserves because they were defending outside of the line. I also made a thread about that. I think it's still up actually because that account is still on. You can read there that actually the Russians were not defending in front of the lines. What they were doing is that impeding the Ukrainian side, the swines I was going to say, but the Ukrainian side of establishing a deeper foothold, which would block them from deploying artillery, because as you know, the artillery logic is the following: infantry pushes a certain line, artillery can come back at you to both cover, but also hit further deep into the Russian backfield. So why are these people still coping? They are coping because actually a lot of these guys put their face to this game and also are not well versed in military matters. It has to be said, when you see who the fuck is commenting, like Ewan MacDonald, Tenier, the supposedly Italian para who invents brigades, fabulates numbers, so on. When you see other people, and I'm gonna make a bit of an ad for a guy that honestly we're never going to be friends, but at least he smelled the shit very early on, like early September. He was like, okay, we got fucked. It's Tatari Gemi. There are other people. Smart UACAT suddenly realized. We had Biduk, also the guy who was helping with the drones, also realized that we're getting fucked, and so on and so on. The situation with these people are that there are PR pieces, there are puff pieces, and they don't understand what they're saying. The Kherson area, if you see, nobody takes it seriously. It's a It's a mistake in my opinion, but not for those reasons. The Kherson area right now is becoming a way for the Ukrainians to divide the Russian effort when it comes to Zaporozhye. Why? Because the Russians would like to make a lot more correction that they are making currently. Currently, the four corrections are, as I said, around Novodonetsk, Plutonie, so the Lobkova axis, and Piataki. They would like to push back on Robotine. They did for some positions around Verbove and up next to the salient, but then they stopped it. They stopped it because, in a sense, the Ukrainians are not completely done over there, and they went back to the same drawing board they were, and they allow them now to go and try their luck onto Kopani. Why are they doing this? Because the units, I think, that's my opinion. I'm not saying it's true. I think that, in my opinion, the unit that replaced the 47, the 33rd, came with fresh assets. Basically, they got back two repaired Leopards 2A4 and some more extra Leopards from the small storage asset that they had. And suddenly you saw all this rush with about 5 Leopards lost since, and freshly baked T64. So there's one Ober 17, another Ober 22, and probably a couple of other T72 EAs. That means that about 10 tanks are already lost around Rabotina. It's not a lot, but you have to understand that the units that are reinforcing there have lost. That was the whole point of this. Have lost the initiative. What they're doing right now is trying to expand and not let the salient die, because that's the biggest problem for Ukraine right now. They fought very hard to have that salient. They would like to keep as much of it going to the spring. If for some reason they completely deplete that line of defense, even if they're trying to strike the Russians back with artillery, as we saw, the biggest problem for Ukrainians was that they, for the last couple of kilometers, so Rabotino and south of Rabotino, they were forced to literally do that by foot, to go and grind through the bushes, through the ditches, and whatever you think, it's a maximum loss. They chose to lose people instead of vehicles, and then they lost vehicles as well because they needed to evacuate those people. So when you think about how the COP is going around for the Ukrainian side, and you read also Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny literally said that, oh my God, I saw after a couple of times say, oh, we're not advancing because we are going to the same grind set as the enemy. We are matching each other. That's not true, by the way. I'm going to explain that in the background. But how the fuck are you the brain behind a counter, and almost 3 months into this counter, you start to understand that you fucked up? And then in his fucking interview for The Economist, he says that I picked up a book. I'm going to post actually that part from a Soviet general at the beginning of the Great Patriotic War, World War II. And he said, oh, I realized that we were like in World War One. Actually, it's not true. In World War One, the biggest problem was that both sides would grind each other to fucking death. There was a parity of means, although in aviation the Allies were getting their shit pushed. The problem is that the Germans couldn't follow up because both the mechanization and motorization for the front line was in existence. So everything had to be done by foot. And even when the tanks came, the first use of the tanks from the Brits was an absolute failure. So the logic here is completely different. The biggest problem for the Ukrainian counter is, and I already spoke about this, that it was ill-conceived, ill-prepared, and the overall calculus that was made by whoever it was, be that the Americans, the NATO allies, Euro-NATO, or the Ukrainians themselves, was extremely bad. And I explained the Orbat was bad, the number of people dedicated to this based on the vehicles given per brigade. Guys, I'm back. I'm really sorry for this. So the main point here is that we did the analysis. I wasn't alone, by the way. First of all, because I'm speaking a lot about myself, but actually, you need to know. Once again, I'm gonna say it was a team behind us. We had a discussion. Most of them are here in the space. Most of them, actually, a big part are listening or try to listen, whatever. But a lot of the guys are in the space, and we had this discussion with multiple. I'm not like some brainiac. Once again, I'm explaining this because I don't want you. I know that it's my space, and sometimes I get over myself. But it was a team effort, and honestly, I learned to appreciate a lot of people. First of them, the two first of them are right here, Trapped and Gammon. Uh, but yeah, basically, we said, not I said, but we said when we discussed that. First of all, it was not enough people based on the vehicles, and second of all, what we were expecting, given how they started the counter, that the counter initially didn't start in Zapo, it started in Bahmut, past the 21st of May 2023, and it started pretty well actually. They recovered a lot of ground around Ivanivske, and then suddenly they stalled, which was the logic. The Russians wanted them to commit as much troops as possible away of Zapo, and that's what they did. They already didn't have enough troops, they already didn't have enough assets, and at some point we had these articles about what's going on. Where are you had David Axe saying like multiple powerful Ukrainian counter brigades are missing. Yes, motherfucker, because they are in completely other side of the front. Because unfortunately, the counter wasn't like a secret. We knew, at least for Zapo, the axis since March with the first attack on Robotine, when I had this quasi meltdown about how the fuck the Russians had prepared their positions. And it was a huge relief that the Ukrainians were apparently green and not, I'd say, skilled or experienced enough to take advantage of their superior position in March. They went downhill, went on counterslope, got completely smashed. A lot of freshly formed officers were killed. I always spoke about the case of one colonel freshly come from the UK and just got killed 3 days after in Robotina. So the whole situation with the counter was from the beginning, when you were logical to what you were seeing, when you met simple math, where you weren't into some fucking Marvel comics universe nonsense, you could understand, okay, these guys have this much time. And we were expecting it with a Team War Criminal crew to actually have some huge losses. And I remember myself trying to calm down early June. Like, I was expecting them in Tokmak within 2 weeks. Let's be honest. This also explains why I memed as madman for about 2 weeks after they absolutely got smashed at the first 2 weeks. But that's something else. The problem with the Ukrainians that already, instead of understanding from the beginning that there was an issue with everything, it's not only like how many people you have, but the attacks as they followed. We had these jokes about one nation because they were doing the same colon attacks. It was logical. They needed to have demand paths, and those demand paths forced them to walk in column, which made it so much easier for the Russians to strike back. And that's the part also that Zaluzhny hinted at, like, we cannot do anything else than what they do. And it's logical because that's I mean, like, that's warfare within the human and earth prerogatives. You cannot have, I mean, you could probably, if you tried very hard, to have Hoover tanks and stuff like that, but with the assets that were given and the assets that everybody knows right now, they were not going to get any other results of the Russians for about 12 months before. So the other part now of this country is not dead, but the fault is on the West, is that the equipment failed to arrive. This actually is not true. If you see, and we're going to speak about the leaks now, if you see the leaks, what was promised by NATO to be ready for March was there at 80%. What didn't happen is actually that Ukrainians couldn't spare their assets from January to June, or even to May. Ukrainians were asked get the fuck out of Bakhmut. They didn't. They tried to defend the city for a reason, once again, for a reason. It wasn't completely stupid. But the problem is that the Russians said thank you very much and kept destroying assets and people within Bakhmut that were very important in maintaining both cohesion, but also maintaining a link between the first line and the back line. We saw that the new brigades were absolutely not ready for what they had to do. And the 47th on that is probably the most egregious example. And that example was because they were absolutely thrashed, and within 3 weeks they had internal infighting. Within 3 weeks, we had the Ukrainians on the 47th. You remember the master sergeant quit. We had all these jokes about how the commander was a fucking sodomite, and there were a lot of problems, insubordination, and all this stuff. So it's logical that if you start losing your core cadres that are going to help you out, and on top of that, part of your new recruits are sent to areas that you know you shouldn't touch right now, that are supposed to be maybe not a feint, but a B plan, a bit like they did between Kherson and Kharkov in 2022. All this is not on NATO. NATO delivered what they needed, and also NATO delivered so much that the only thing that kept the Ukrainians in the game, I'm going to repeat it, was the HIMARS strikes and the intelligence. They were fucking using HIMARS on D-30s, guys. That maintained this counter, that is maintaining Ukraine alive for about 11 months now. The intelligence influx, the long-range precision-guided missiles, and they just are adding fuel to the fire. We had ATACMS this morning. There was a post about 3 more ATACMS strikes. We're going to see what the result is. And you have this ongoing complaint about we need more, we need more, we need more. And that's what I said already in my thread, that it's both a gambler's mentality, but it shows an addiction. Like, you had this Kherson and Kharkov victories, where they were great, and you had this first high, and now you want to get the same high. In this case, our results, actually, it's not as much high as everything. But you cannot find it, despite the fact that more and more is invested in you. There is a reason to complain about the West world, but that's unfortunately is capitalism. That's what the Western world is about. Why are the Western industries not ready to support Ukraine in its industrial war? Well, it's very simple. Someone has to pay for it. And while back in the Cold War, you had this behemoth called Soviet Union, and honestly, guys, it was a behemoth. I mean, like, if you want to compare Russia now with the Soviet Union, even at its last throes, motherfucker, they were producing like 1,200 tanks, and it was a bad year, 1991. We're not speaking about 82, 83, when you had 600 T-80s, still 2 to 300 T-64 BVs, and 1,500 T-72s. Like, god damn it. You cannot compare both. And actually, in a sense, Russia is in the game also because it's past investment. But the thing is the following. The Ukrainians are not getting what they want because it's costing too much expense and too much investment long range. For some assets, you can make long-term contracts. You can make long-term contracts. So you can make long-term contracts for artillery rounds, that's for sure. But then you have a problem because it's still going to be between 5 and 7 years. I made the calculus last year already. Given what they give to Ukraine, what Ukraine is supposed to use and lose, and what the barrel usage is, they need to backfill so hard that it's going to last them 5 to 7 years. That's true. but with a certain level. That means that Ukraine needs to win or lose the war within 2025. So the calculus here for artillery rounds might pan out in terms of long-term investment, a decade, because after that, it's amortized, you have had more people, money has circulated, your economy has grown. But that also means that Ukraine needs to lose at least 30 to 50,000 people for 5 years. It is already with a portion of its nominal population. So this is the whole point here. The whole point is not that if Western decides to do something, they cannot do it. The problem is that they simply cannot afford to do it within the constraints of their own economies and their own economical systems. So our biggest problem here, once again, is not that there is no help on behalf of... sorry guys, because there is a phone call again. Okay, doesn't matter. The biggest situation here is that the constraints where the Western economy is right now are simply way beyond what they can afford. Let's be told. First of all, because they lost, at least Europe, because on the US it's different, there was an exchange of money, but Europe lost about $1 trillion in energy and exports alone during this war with Russia. Everybody's going to say, yeah, it's not that much. Actually, it is. Because it's an extra cost right on the money. It's not like you expanded your economy that much. No, it's pure cost. You had extra cost, and so you contracted your economy. And we can see, as I already showed, that the 3 quarters that went, Germany has not grown. They have been going down. Okay, it's not much. It's 0.02 and 0.01, but you don't have a growth. And that's a direct impact of the past cost for your energy and lost output. It's like everything else. If you start paying more, getting less, well, you're going to get less and less until it goes back on. But in order for them to go back on, the war needs to stop. Because that would mean that you wouldn't have to spend. So basically, the investment that Europe needs to do, both to replenish its stocks, but also to help Ukraine, is roughly around 1 trillion. Right now, Europe doesn't have the capability to spend that on top of the 1.2 to 1.5 trillion that has already been lost for the continent. Because you also need to know, Ukraine itself, so what was given to Ukraine as military help, as financial help, as humanitarian help, is over 200 billion right now in euros. A lot of people are going to be skeptical of this claim, but I'm telling you, just start making the accounts. You are going to see that Ukraine, as a cost to maintain that state alive, especially in the light of the loss of export value, Ukraine lost at least 30 billion the first year, pure export, and is losing about 29 billion this year. And that is in spite of the grain deal. So if you analyze it well, the cost, a lot of people say, yeah, it's nothing. We're spending like 70 billion, and it's not even 10% of our budget to defeat Russia. Yes, maybe for America, but the people who are really paying the cost for this are the Euros. And the Euros now, if you see who is losing the main armament, the Leopard tanks, right now we are at 23 damaged. There are probably about 30 with the rear strikes, the Avaries, everything. So 1/3 of what was delivered is out of action in a way or another, burned, damaged, in repairs, whatever you want. And it's more or less 2% of the total European fleet. That's about 1,700 tanks. But more than half of that fleet is not touchable because there are Leopards in Greece and Turkey. They look at each other. There are other Leopards that cannot just be given because there's no more production. The Germans are buying existing tanks to retrofit them to a certain standard. It would cost between 20 and 27 million euros to build a new model of Leopard. Okay, technologies have changed and everything, whatever. But if you want to reproduce 100 tanks for the Bundeswehr right now, it's going to cost you over 2 billion euros. So when I tell you guys that their investment to replenish the Ukrainian losses, but also to rearm on the European side is fucking crazy. And this is the funny part. At the beginning, everybody was laughing with the Russia demilitarizing the continent because right now, oh, everybody's investing for this and for that. I'm like, whenever, bro. I mean, the Russians literally lost an empire because 12 to 17% of the GDP, when it was the Soviet Union, went in a way or another to armament. If you want to throw cash outside based on weapons that you're not going to use, because that's the funny thing, Russia has made a virtue here of not overstepping this war within Ukraine. And in a sense, I understand that a lot of Turbovata that are listening here are like, yeah, we should strike Poland, we should strike Romania, we should strike all these areas of transfer. No, that's the whole point. It has always been the whole point for the Russians. They understand that the proxy war has disadvantages. So in one case, resupplies are going unabated, ISR is going unabated, but the real cost that is being paid by Ukrainians, at some point, I'm going to say it's not the human cost, it's the fact that everything that they need right now, every single thing, and don't get me started over this bullshit about home production, we can see that the most recent tanks that are being produced, or at least retrofitted, are done in the Czech Republic. I honestly need to do a mea culpa. I didn't think that the Czechs could have the tools to retrofit T-64s. But at the same time, it was stupid on me because the whole point was to ship them back there, ship the people from Kharkiv, and there are no threats of bombardment. Of course, you have less material to work on because T-64s have never been produced by the Czechs. So the main thing that could help is small refits, subcomponents, of course, thermals and stuff like that. But all this, when you get them together, it's still very limited. They are producing less than 12 tanks, or they're refurbishing less than 12 tanks in the Czech Republic, and they're losing 12 tanks a week. And they're losing their own kind of tanks. T-64s, I need to do a small calculus, but I think this week they are already at 8. So your monthly production in the Czech Republic, or refurbishment in the Czech Republic, goes away within days. And that's why my thought of this is that when it comes to the volume alone, the only possibility would have been that the Americans started a refurbishment program of their Abrams. But the Americans are smart, to be honest. What they're thinking right now is let's deplete the shit out of whatever Europeans can afford to lose, and let's go back with our products. We already have a couple of people that were getting murdered because they gave away BMPs. The Greeks were supposed to be in that ring. Some guys are going to get Bradleys because they gave up Cold War assets. Bradley is also Cold War, but you know what I mean. So all this logic for the Americans, of course, is great. Most of the costs that we're supposed to pay on Ukraine goes back to their industrial concern. Most of the cost that is spent by the Europeans in a way or another, I mean, look at the fucking Germans. They sabotaged the Euro Tiger attack helicopter to go back to Apache 60HE. The Brits right now are literally shitting bricks because they cannot use their proprietary weapons, the brimstones. They need to buy them and reintegrate Hellfires from the US, paying over $300 million for that shit. And for, I think, less than 1,000 missiles. It's fucking madness. So, of course, for America, all this shit is funny. The real losers are the Europeans, and we already know that. I already spoke about my profession. I saw the prices go up and down like a fucking yo-yo, but now we're going only up. There is still some demand, but most of the sales, especially in ore, are because we have long-term contracts with some people. They need to produce, but there's still not enough for what they need them to do. I explained to you at some point there was a tender for chromium ore in order to redo the barrels of T-72s and Leopards and so on. I didn't win that tender. I thought I had, but didn't. The guy who won it is now calling because he doesn't have enough. And he also has the payment on the, he has problems with the payment rate because everything is going way slower than was predicted. The tender was for so much, was for over 800 barrels. But for a reason or another, there are not 800 barrels anymore in Ukrainian inventory. Or someone isn't paying, so the work isn't being done. And so the purchase is not being taken over. So my competitor now stays over chromium ore that he cannot sell because he bought it at certain prices, and now his chromium ore fell down. That price fell down, so he cannot sell that shit and make a loss. Touch wood, I had a lot of luck on that one. But this is what I'm explaining to you, and we had this fucking explanation in May as well, with me having a meltdown of someone telling me that you don't know what you're talking about, and like, bro, I'm in the field, I can see what's going on. And that's also one thing I want to say, and we had that also for the artillery. The European suppliers are also saying, like, I posted Namo that said right now the capacity for whole of Europe, which used to be 350, is at 500K. So the excess production is not even where it's supposed to be. Remember that we're supposed to give the Ukrainians 1 million fucking rounds, and they have spent over 1.2 million. The Germans themselves, on top of the general cost, spent 420 million in order for Rheinmetall's Expal, and also the new factory that was supposed to be built in Düsseldorf. And where are the results? The results are simple. Right now, there is not enough demand and not enough offer, not enough supply for them to be able to fulfill their quota. On top of it, there was this bickering because the Americans were discussing on how to get their level of commitment up. And it's true, they did a lot. But most of it was starting to buy shit elsewhere. They contracted the Bulgarians for about 220,000 rounds of 152. And the Bulgarians, because, well, they are Balkanic as well, what they did, they also contacted Ukrom and said, you know, guys, we can do 152 for you. Very smart guys, but it slowed down the whole fucking supply line. Because they were being paid in both sides. The Ukrops are paying the Bulgarians about 1,300 euros a piece. On the other side, the Americans had paid about $1,900 a piece. So for the Bulgarians, of course, the price is very low, so it's very interesting for everybody to buy there. But at some point, you cannot offer that same price ongoing. Meanwhile, the Germans, for about 280,000 pieces, are around the 4,000 to 5,000 euros a piece. So this whole system of supplies, of prices, of offerings makes that in Europe, at least, I'm not even speaking for America, the supply line is completely dysfunctional, and there is still a huge part going out of the stocks. The French, the last rounds that the French have sent as part of the European supply line were ammunition made for the French army in 2022. When you see the production date of a lot of Ukrainian rounds, especially shown on the media that we see, they're also dating from 2023. A lot more of them are popping up to be fresh out of the stamping. So this whole logic, once again, is not that the Western allies are not offering enough. the whole logic is that the Western allies are stuck with a situation where the supply process, at least for Europe, I'm not speaking for the US, but even the US doesn't want to get entangled into a white elephant project where they would spend like 20, 30, 40 billion dollars for a niche product for them. For the Americans, artillery, when you see the number of barrels they are able to afford to the Ukrainians, is between 2,000 barrels. The Russians in storage, I'm saying in storage, according to OSINT, have over 8,000 barrels. So, not speaking new productions, not speaking new assets, that's what the Soviet Union left them. And we're not even sure that everything is taken into account. So, just like imagine the discrepancy of how the war is being thought and fought in Ukraine itself, and the capabilities that the Western allies and NATO can offer. In this case, the sudden income of the F-16 might be an escalation too much. I think for the Russians, not that we'll not be able to cope with it, but the entry in the game of the F-16 is going to go along the same pattern that we see with every so-called game changer, which is they're going to hit a big score to start for, and then they're going to vanish. My biggest situation is the following, is that they're going to pop out, shoot one Su-35 in an ambush, they're going to lose another F-16, that shit's going to fall somewhere when the Russians going to be able to film it, and then the moving out is going to be accompanied by a large barrage of ammunition toward whatever air base, infrastructure, enemy target the Russians may have on their kill chain. And this is, once again, as I said, it's just a ladder in the escalation that will not change the nature of the as necessary to deter the Russians. So about 120 F-16s, to me, is absolute nonsense, because that would mean that based on what the Ukrainians have as air bases free right now, you would see almost decoupling, so 10 times more aircraft per base than you have right now. Right now, you have between 2 and 5 aircraft that do a touchdown in any base around Western Ukraine. That would mean that if at full power, so at full 120 jets, those guys, you're going to have to defend them as basically Fort Knox. You're going to have to give those air bases a lot more air defenses that you can afford for cities like Kiev. So I don't understand the logic behind it, except for making the war more costly for Russia. Once again, it's true, and it's a logical perspective when it comes to the Americans, but it's not a logical perspective when it comes to Ukrainians. Ukrainians need to liberate their country, not to bleed the Russians. This is the fundamental problem that we're seeing here. And then I come back to the cope that Ukrainians or pro-Ukrainians are using right now. Now suddenly the counter was not only to liberate more real estate for Ukraine. No, it was also to attract Russia. Attrition is the strategic goal. And I'm like, let's go and see what happened. I already made the calculus. The Russians, in the same time frame as the first year, lost less than half. Of course, it's not that positive, as I said, because given the front has shrunk, it should have been at a third of those losses, plus minus 20 to 30%, given that we're on the attack for most of the year, except on one part of the front for the last 5 months. Yet they are over that. As I said, they should have been at 3.6 thousand asset loss, based always on Oryx. Once again, that you believe it or not, it's not important here. The point is the balance, the trending, the accounting. Oryx can lie as much as it wants, but if you wanted to lie, you would say the Ukrainians have lost 1,000 vehicles to the 4,200 on the Russian side. That didn't happen because, unfortunately, as I said, right now we have a lot more evidence of Ukrainian losses. I already spoke about the fact that Oryx and others do not count some evident losses on the Ukrainian side because they say we cannot geolocate them. But if you add those plus other recounts, you're going to end up at 2,200, 2,300. So the losses on the Ukrainian side were actually worse for the front that they were. So this attrition logic that supposedly was prevailing on the Ukrainian coping side right now is even worse because when you analyze the attrition back in Bahmut, it was bad for Ukraine compared to what it was before. I already made a comparison that if you still best on Oryx, once again, I know that you're not going to be okay with it. I'm just using the trending. The Russians were going from 4.2 losses to 1 down to 2.8 something. That 1.5 lost less meant that the ratio had changed enormously. And it shows right now in the sense that the Ukrainians, once again, need to lose a lot less than what they were already losing in 2022. But in fact, the trend is going away. You can say that the Russians have less to lose when we see what happens in Ugledar and Avdiivka. I'm not so sure because they are throwing tanks and vehicles as they want. However, once again, the Ukrainians should have spared a lot more during the counter. I made the reference. In the first almost 7 months, the Ukrainians lost as much as the next 4 months. Like, what happened? And what happened is very simple. Bad planning, underestimation of the Russians, a bad alliance supporting them. I mean, the biggest scope that you already know, crew survived. We had this joke. The biggest problem when it comes to the loss of a vehicle on the NATO side, so a Ukrainian vehicle, is that they are overweight. If you want to move a Leopard 2 A4 with the add-ons and all the shit, you have to track and pull a 57-ton tank. If you want to put your own T-64 out of the mud, you are pulling a 41-ton tank. The means needed to evacuate those also meant that these tanks stayed outside for a while, and in some cases, it's regrettable that the Russians didn't do more to completely burn them out. In a sense, I really think that they thought that they would be able to hold the line a lot more in order to afford them to pull the vehicle away when it was possible, like the light vehicles like the CV90 or the AMC-10 RC. Well, they did it. Lighter vehicle, put it on the fucking truck, go away. The Leopard would have been a massive undertaking. We saw that the Ukrainians got fucked, were trying to do that. The Russians also got hit, were trying to move their own T90s and T80 BVMs, sorry. So all these cases, the logic is very simple. Your logistical nightmare with NATO starts by the fact these guys are overweight. Starts by the fact that you need a lot more fuel for them. So one, I think, of the main unsung heroes is that logistically the Ukrainians were far from perfect in supplying and maintaining these assets. Most important part comes now. One of the biggest failures of the countries was also that, in my opinion, the logistical aspect of the Ukrainian army hasn't been solved. There is a member in Twitter, a pro-Ukrainian member, Jeff28 something. I'm gonna post. I actually already posted some of his lists, and he keeps a rather meticulous list on the supplies pledged or delivered to Ukraine from both private and official donors. The official part of it is always a bit sketchy. Why? Because multiple times we have seen that things had been done to Ukraine, had been given to Ukraine that we didn't know. I'm going to say the Finnish M46s, Finnish Jackson's Bs, a couple of other vehicles, a couple of other ammunitions. So on that part, I'm not going to touch. However, we know that the private donations, those are open, and those represent around 40% of how the Ukrainian army functions. And on his list, okay, that list is not exhaustive. I think that you have to also add about 20% on that list from self purchase from the soldiers and the units when it comes to trucks, pickups, and stuff like that. But on that list, you can see that there are about 6,000 assets given. Out of the 6,000 assets, most of them, over 4,000, are pickups and light vehicles. Which means that, let's take 4,000 given during the whole war, so there are losses in there. I'm not calculating the losses, I'm just calculating the theoretical maximum that these volunteers, private sector can give and can afford to Ukrainian forces to move around. So if we go for a ton for every single civilian vehicle, why I'm saying 1 ton, because you know how it is. You can support a small trailer of 750 kilograms on the back, plus about 250 kilos on your car, SUV mostly, or when it's a minivan, it's a bit more. But let's say in average, you are 1 ton per vehicle. That means that your supply potential on those 4,000 vehicles at maximum is going to be 4,000 tons. That's why we call them mosquito logistics, because actually it's not much, but given the ease of access to them, so okay, you lost 10 pickups in a week, no problem, you're going to still find them. Money is an issue, that's true. We're not discussing it, but as I said, you can find shitty pickups in Poland for 2,000 to 3,000 euros if people start giving all over the place, diaspora, charities, all this shit that we had in Europe. It's not a big deal to get a hold of 300, 400, 500 pieces more. Your problem is going to be finding someone who can afford to sell you for less. That's why when I had this discussion with Jeff, the guy I'm talking about the French trucks that were recently delivered by the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, because he was like, yeah, you know, those are privately sourced. I'm like, yeah, for sure, they could very well be privately sourced, but one of the trucks was still in French 90s storage delivery. So that one didn't come from a private. We can see all over the TRM 2000s that are on sale, especially on ex-mil surplus types, are all completely different. They don't come from storage assets that are already been sold by the procurement director in France. And in many cases, you can see that a lot of things that made the military vehicles have been pulled away. It's illogical to make them demilled and stuff like that. But you could see those who were in pristine conditions. Switches were still back like they were in the military. And also, suddenly you find 14 out of them in mint condition, honestly. Very, 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 very little potential. Those were bought apart, put together, repainted, and everything. As I said, one of the painting or the paint coats was like typically French. But the 4 others, you had 4 VLRAs, excellent off-road trucks, not a lot of transport, but excellent ones. And you could see that 2 of them were still active trucks because they had the reinforcement and the open hatch manhole on top of the roof. And I had this feeling, okay, you know that I live partly in France. I had this feeling that those were probably parade vehicles that were given that, like, Arcus, Akmat in this case, is making new ones for the years to come, and they are slowly being phased out. So in all these cases, the main concern for the Ukrainians is that their mosquito fleet is helpful in denying the Russians to completely incapacitate them, but it also is too little to sustain what the Ukrainian army wants to do as a maneuver army. And one of the things is, like, this small mosquito army, theoretically, what has been delivered so far, even if it's only 40%, shows that if you double it up, it could go up to maybe 16,000 tons that can be transported if the Ukrainian army works in the same principle. And also, very important, we have already discussed this, the Ukrainians on Oryx always lose very little trucks. And every time I'm saying that, it's not because they don't have them, but it's that they literally have that little. Their biggest capability of making trucks was a Poroshenko auto manufacturer with parts from Belarus. That thing stopped. Belarus is not supplying parts anymore. The plant was already in bankruptcy. Thank you, Zelevova, because he started the inquiries on the Bogdan factory. And it was also bombed by the Russians. So the only way to supplement the Ukrainian army right now when it comes to the logistics is that the current European armies deliver to them trucks and similar vehicles. This, unfortunately, is extremely rare. Like, we had the discussion that the Americans thought 3 months into the counter to give them fuelers. And this is the biggest problem that they have right now. This is the biggest problem that, as I said, show that for a reason or another, whoever is designing the war plan on the Ukrainian side or on the NATO side is not thinking about a victory. They're really thinking about raising the costs for Russia. And it is also seen into the fact that the Ukrainians, in my opinion, always, from the beginning, were pushed into finishing up the Russians whenever they could. And this is something that, unfortunately, it is what it is. I really think that the shoot to kill policy, the permanent damage mode that we saw all over the first 6 months of the war, especially attacking the medical crews and so on, that was a calculus coming from the fact that we need to damage them as much as possible early on, so the recovery on the Russian side for a long war is going to be as slow as possible. That, in a certain way, didn't work, because I think when the first major losses started to come in on the Russian side, the reaction was rather swift. It led to the humiliation in Kiev. It cannot be called otherwise. And it led also, in a sense, into this overconfidence on the Ukrainian side and on the NATO side. Now, is the counter officially over? As I said, everybody's calling it off, especially with the 47th and the 22nd already moved around Bakhmut, and 47th already moved in Avdiivka. The counter has been already dead for a while. We discussed this, where the intensity in reality has been going down on the Ukrainian side. And I described more or less what I expected from the Russians. It is happening, maybe not as hard as I thought. And this has a lot to do with the fact that the Russians, in a sense, but not completely learned their lesson and not to run behind the Ukrainians right away, although in first impression could have been logical. So, you have a guy that is losing or is not as capable of attacking you anymore, so you go back at it. The Russians actually know how it works because they tried small counters all over the summer, and most of them ended up just stalemating the situation, but they didn't regain the positions. Now they are slowly going back to some of the lost positions. As I said, Pretoria
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
is going down, Piatak is going down, the Urozhany area is seeing counteroffensive and corrections on that line. And this is also helped by the fact that Ukrainians completely split their forces and now are trying a lot of things in Kherson, once again, in order to stop the Russians from focusing back to Zaporozhye. And I mean, Kherson is probably what most of these scopers are pointing out, that we have a new direction, the counter is going to be there, going to win. Problem with Kherson is the following. It stops major counters on both sides, but it allows both sides to use what they've been doing for a while now, which is long-range artillery, long-range FPVs, which is how a lot of these people, especially on the Ukrainian side, can still move by boat. They get called by aviation, FPVs, artillery, whatever you want, but they also can inflict long-range damage, especially now with the FPVs having these huge batteries that can go up to 15 kilometers, no problem. When this thing started, both sides were happy to hit 6 kilometers. Now 10 kilometers is nothing, and Ukraine said there is this 10-kilometer no tank on the Russian side because they don't want to lose on Kherson. That's not exactly true, but what is true is that the immediate first line has been unmanned for a while now. And that actually should tell Ukrainians to do something about it as well, because they keep sending people in staging points like immediately in front of the Dnieper, which invites guided bombs from the Russians, artillery, and so on and so on. And therefore, the frontline Kherson is turning to a complete shit show where the Ukrainian plan is working in keeping the Russians away from the landing stripes, but it doesn't nullify the river in between. So the logistical aspect is a complete shit show. And also, they get hit on their bridgeheads from 70 kilometers. So there is a reverse HIMARS there going on. And this is the biggest situation here, is that on the PR side, it's very fine. You're gonna have Ukrainians in villages, and I already posted a double tweet from Julian Röpke, Abu Julani, where in end of July he was like, "Yeah, we got the village proven, Ukrainians there." Early September, Russians have recovered the territory, is over. So these things, actually, that's what I said, are going to create a lot of misery, and unfortunately, they cost also the post to the head of the Dnieper group. But the Ukrainians do not have the capability so far to cross in numbers and cross with assets. And this is, in a sense, ironically, because of the Kakova Dam going bust. If you want to cross to the Kakova, which is dry, quote unquote, you're free to do it. But that doesn't happen for a reason, because the whole territory there is marshland. So it will be even worse than trying to go by barges 600 meters, than going through soft ground over 3 to 4 kilometers on tanks and other vehicles, getting bogged down and literally becoming food for FPVs and other nice Russian presence. So the whole logic here, on the Kherson side, it's more than cope, is actually the epitome of how a Ukrainian supporter is on almost everything. These guys are completely into delirium when they win, and they completely in denial when they lose. And this is why I think, in a sense, I made the joke, we on the Z sphere have the chance to have hyper doomers, so almost the exact contrary. We have so much doomers. I've never seen this shit. Like people who have been following me since the beginning of the war, I see them. They have become something like I don't understand. Once again, I'm not optimistic at all. I've never said that we're gonna win this like this. No, my idea is that this is gonna be bloody long, and the victory at the end is still gonna get spoiled because the Americans are going to agree to half-assed measures, a bit like Minsk. They are going to agree to ceding territory, but they're still going to make it extremely complicated to actually enjoy that territory, and they are going to be there cock-blocking Russia into its interactions with both Ukraine and Europe for the foreseeable future. So in a sense, victory is going to have a huge sense in fortifying Russia's own destiny, in a sense, and going back to a Euro-Asian model. But that idea when you're going to have this fait accompli like in Crimea, I always said, forget about it. And actually, I was even opposed to the war as it stands in 2021, mostly because the war would have meant, in my opinion, but I didn't thought that Putin was going to go a bit softish like this, would have meant completely raising half of Ukraine from the Dnieper until Luhansk. And funny part, we are going towards such a scenario, maybe not as dramatic as raising all of it, but the damage that is going to be done to the eastern bank of the Dnieper is going to be catastrophic within 2025 if the situation goes the way I see it. Because now we're going to go to Avdiivka. If Avdiivka pays out the way I see it, from January to February 2024, the Ukrainians are going to start manning new lines in front of Pokrovske, behind Pokrovske, and trying not to lose Konstantinovka. That would mean that the F-16s that probably were supposed to clear up the Black Sea initially, they are going to try and stop Russian planes from bombing Konstantinovka, which means that we're going to have maybe some long-range duels in the skies, but they are going to make the Russians pay an extremely high price for those sister cities in North Donbass. However, once again, it would be, as I said, once a strategic defeat for the Ukrainians to completely switch fronts and try to defend Donbass, because that's where the Russians are actually the strongest when it comes to logistics, and where the Ukrainians are the weakest in the sense that, as I said, the advancement of the Russians towards Pokrovsk is going to force them to either build a new railway in between the two, a bit like the Russians are doing now along the Azov coast, or accept this game and lose tempo. Losing tempo in this war, we've seen it with the Russians in September 2022. If you start losing tempo, you're going to get eaten, especially if you're Russia. Why? Because the intelligence is, unfortunately, again, still yet on the Ukrainian side. And the Americans are doing an outstanding job, and honestly, a huge part of the issues that the Russians had initially in Avdiivka is because the Americans could provide timely intelligence. Although, once again, the biggest situational mistake for the Ukrainian side is that they let Avdiivka happen, in the sense that the Russians could spare forces, could mass them, and then just press them into the attack. This is something that a lot of people until now were complaining about. How the fuck are the Ukrainians able to do that every time that there is an attack? Remember in 2022? Well, that's how. There are multiple ways to do it. Fines, small groups coming together, converging together at one point, and so on. Well, the Russians did it in Avdiivka, and it's right now causing a large problem. Now, on Avdiivka itself, as we had already discussed, I made a couple of threads on it. Things are, no, I'm not going to say going great, quite the contrary, things are going okay-ish. We are expecting the development for today and tomorrow. And I think by the end of the weekend, we're going to see movement towards the south, so from the Zenit military camp. If you know, you get the quarry next to a pitnet that was taken. Next to it is an abandoned military camp that Ukrainians mined profusely. The military camp itself is not that much of a problem to take. It's just that it goes into defilade from the 9th district, which is literally the strongest point, except for the coke plant on top of it. And, well, the problem is that you need to suppress the 9th district by coming as close as possible and then take over a military camp and moving on the western flank of Tsarskaya Okhota and trying to get inside Avdiivka. Butuzov in his letter said that we're telling them they cannot enter Avdiivka. The problem is that once the Russians are in Avdiivka, you're done for. So that cope was extremely doubtful to me. And I also explained that given what he was describing as a topographical layout, he either was lying, either was coping. Butuzov has this habit of coping and lying at the same time. He did that with Bahmut, he did that with Zapo, he did that with a lot of things. What I'm seeing, and if everything is true, then the Russians are doing the right thing with a cost. And if Stepove is cleared, I explained, next fallback for the Ukrainians is not going to be Berdishi because Berdishi is in low ground. They're going to occupy the village to make like a last stand on that area before going to Semenivka. If they are to Semenivka, it's game over because they're going to have a high ground again. It's just in front of Stepove and to the Avdiivka plateau. But it means that if they want to counterattack, they're going to have to go to the depression again. Going to the depression means getting bombarded, getting FPV'd, getting shot at. Basically, that axis there is going to be staying silent and locked for a while. But it also means that the paved road that goes on the line of Semenivka, parallel to it, is done for. So they need to go way back and try to find another way to resupply Avdiivka. This is the masterstroke. It's extremely intelligent. It's an extremely intelligent move on the Russian side. But my biggest situation with this is not as much that is a masterstroke, because like once you see the map, there were very few options, and I think some losses might probably deter the Russians from going down south, which was my personal choice because down south you have covers on both sides, in the sense that you're gonna enter Ukrainian held territory with a little bit of houses and covers on both sides, which would allow you to expand your reach within the city. If you do what you're doing right now, which is trying to take over the coke plant, the fight's going to be a lot more violent, savage. The benefits are going to be greater, let's be honest about it, because then you literally cut the ongoing supply road. But my biggest problem right now is that if the coke plant is the way I see it, I should have made a thread. I'm going to make a thread about how you can approach the coke plant. That means that for a long while, you're going to lose a lot of people approaching the buildings behind the two cooling towers. You're going to lose at least 100 people just trying to get close. And everything's going to go like FPVs, artillery, snipers. It's going to be a mess. And the only possibility is again, to have horrible scenes of tanks and APCs coming very close, covering with fire, getting hit, burning. And unfortunately, a lot of pro-Z people apparently have no appetite for that, and after 2 years of war, still get all weak at the knees. But yeah, that's if they want to avoid those scenes, it's going to be either bodies, other vehicles. There is no way around it, and no dropping UMPKs on those buildings is not going to change much, as we saw with Marinka, as we saw with Popastin, as we saw with Rubizhnoye, as we saw with Bahmut. It's not going to change much. First of all, because those buildings are rather sturdy. We're not speaking about Gaza pancake buildings, but also because the area of attack is almost 4 kilometers wide. So your flanks need to be as much covered as the area that they seized right now from Krasnogorivka. So it's a huge undertaking, and this is why I would have rather preferred to be in smaller groups from the south, go unfortunately house to house for about 2 to 3 weeks, establishing a foothold, and then, as I said, cutting back the Zvyati Vinogradny fortified area instead of doing that. But apparently, the Russians are either in a hurry or have a good feeling about this, and so far, okayish. But if that pays off, well, it's going to be a masterstroke just before the end of the year, and we would have again reopened the maneuver phase in the Donbass war. Because, as I said, once you get Avdiivka, the guys need to pull back at least 10 kilometers. It's going to be 4 up to Sevenivka, and then another 4 to the Karlovka Reservoir, and then another 4 behind the Karlovka Reservoir. That's almost 200 square kilometers liberated or freed from Ukrainian presence, because they would be stuck in front of the Karlovka Reservoir, something that I said I think was the goal from the Russian side, is just to have as much real estate west of Avdiivka as they could, so that they could protect Donetsk from artillery strikes. Once the guys go back there, you have the other situation, which is that the north of Kurakovo and Ugledar is now a salient. Defensive, offensive, it depends who's going to budge first. And given how the Russians moved east of Mikilske, it gives a little bit of a indication on how it's going to go. And unfortunately for the Ukrainians, everything is showing that whoever is planning it, the execution is always something different. Whoever is planning it, he understands the map, he understands the choke points on the Ukrainian army. So I would be very afraid on the Ukrainian side, because, as I said, yes, you're going to have Marinka completely Marinka is going to be in a salient. If the guys are going towards Netailove and Karlivka, then you have 20 kilometers towards Pobieda and Konstantinovka, and 40 kilometers towards Ugledar. So you open a whole gap on top of the Ugledar positions right now, and given they're already attacking around the Novomikhailivka axis in order to cut the 0532, it looks to me, honestly, that maybe the deadlock, I said it already, the deadlock for up north is at Vivka, but the deadlock for southern Donetsk can also be unlocked by that movement there. And I'm going to make a map and point it to you guys. It's going to be a huge salient if they arrive into the Kalifka Reservoir. The advancement is going to be at least, as I said, 20 kilometers. 17 kilometers more or less. And that cuts the E50 towards Peromaiske, and then that would also cut the E50 at Selidove, and then would have to again move from Prokofsk transversely towards Konstantinopil, and then upstairs on top towards Serihivka and Kramatorsk. So all those things are clearly a logistical war right now. That's why the attrition claimed by the pro-Ukrainian side, in a sense, for me, is extremely problematic. And now the funny part is, we all read articles over how Zelensky's out of touch, and that at some point he ordered a attack on Gorlovka. To be honest, I completely understand why he would think that if you see what the third independent brigade is publishing. Azovites are publishing victory after victory. Never mind why they have only advanced 6 kilometers in 4 months. Don't say that. That's something else. But they are in Andriivka, they are in Klishivka, they are in Kudmirivka. They have also moved to Ozarinivka. So basically, the advance for them in order to attack Gorlovka is 10 kilometers. It's not much. The problem with those 10 kilometers is that they would have to attack I'm not going to say a fortress because it's not really a fortress, but they would have to attack the northern salient of the current Donetsk front line with a glorified battalion. And we know how well the Ukrainians attack large positional fronts. So I have this feeling that the Ukrainians they conned themselves into thinking they could do everything. And most of it is because they are also a major PR purveyor, and they do it well. We have to admit that they do it extremely well. Like when you see their footages, you're like, "Oh my God, they just killed 15 Russians! What's going on? Why they are not advancing?" And this is something I already told you guys before. Unfortunately, this PR doesn't go with the cost of those 15 killed. Like, I've been posting the cost. Other people have been posting the cost of that. But Ukrainians themselves, they don't do it. And the Russians do also the same. And this is why sometimes I think that we should look on the other side and see exactly what they try to do, or what they do and how they do it. I have this feeling when they show losses on the Russian side, they get ganged up by Pro-Z, which just mock them. Guys, I would tell you, look attentively how it's done, because at the beginning they were showing the whole process. Now they do it less and less. Now, as I said, a couple of latest HIMARS or guided ammunition shots were extremely sketchy, were quasi failures or straight up failures. We saw the attack on the Krasua system, which, okay, maybe the first strike wasn't that bad, but the second strike was literally over 30 meters wide of mark. And then you saw that the drone fried on itself. So we should right now be aware of the fact that indeed the Ukrainians do not have the staying power. I explained this. They do not have the military power right now to achieve what they want. And they will probably never get that power to do exactly what they want, which is take back Crimea, push the Russians completely away from Ukraine. What we should be aware is that they are going to try their best, which means they're going to die a lot. But we also should know that the guys who are giving them the gun and the ammunition and the supplies, their real goal is not to liberate Ukraine. The real goal is to bleed Russia. So on this aspect, I said, yes, for a while we need to, mock the Ukrainians and line up all the reasons for their failure. But in a sense, for the Americans, it's just, a dumb bitch that got fucked, and you just throw it and you're going to pass to another bitch, Taiwan or whatever. So, in a sense, when Advivka is falling and when the way is going to be opened again to move north of Donbass, then I think, once again, I'm going to repeat myself, we're going to see a political breakthrough. Because the whole Donbass right now for Ukraine is Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Drushkovka, and Konstantinovka. All the rest, the second line around Pokrovsk and Alexandrivka are really small cities. Like, as I said, Alexandrivka is like, I think, 20,000 people. Not even 20,000, like 7,000. Dobropila, probably around 17,000. Pokrovsk is huge, probably between 30 and 50,000. And it's a cluster of urban development with Selidove, Mirnograd, and sorry guys, and then Slovyanka. So the goal, on top of the sister upstairs, is to get Pokrovsk. If Pokrovsk is nullified or taken, and at least Konstantinovka is taken and Drushkovka is liberated or freed from the Ukrainians, then for all purpose, the Donetsk Oblast is done for. And this is where I think the Ukrainians are going to start discussing terms. Because suddenly, once you are in Pokrovsk, around the northern highway, so the Kramatorsk-Slovyansk towards Izyum and then Kharkiv, then you are going to start threatening Pavlograd. Pavlograd from Pokrovsk is about 100 kilometers, but it's extremely vulnerable because we already have seen what the Russians are able to do, and if they start putting a buffer between Pokrovsk and Petropavlivka, around Slovyanka, then they would have their fucking oblast. So basically, the Donetsk Oblast is done for, which is first annexion. Luhansk Oblast, they're missing 1% right now. Not a big deal. And then your biggest problem, as Russia, is the Zaporozhye Oblast. The Zaporozhye Oblast, unfortunately, is really okay. They own over 70% of it. So, but it would need the Orikhiv-Pologi axis, and if you are around, as I said, Pokrovsk, the front line from Zaporizhia is going to be, as I said once again, about 150 kilometers. And you are fucked as Ukraine, because you will lose easily 2 to 3,000 square kilometers. Yep, about 3,000 square kilometers at the least, and up to 7,000 square kilometers at the end of the whole advance from the Russian side. It would be, as I said, the end of the war politically for Zelensky, because that would mean a advance on the Russian side to levels, especially strategic levels, because that's the worst part here. The strategic levels of taking Slavenska, Matorsk, Družkivka, and Kostanivka means that your whole plan to defend and have this political acumen behind Donbass area is gone. You lost Lugansk Oblast, you lost Donetsk Oblast, and the rest is going to be just a huge cauldron around what's left of Zaporozhye and part of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast around Pokrovsk. And there, given the roadways into Pokrovsk, into Zaporozhye, and so on, then we could see a campaign of damaging the crossings around the Dnieper. Then it would make sense for the Russians to do a couple of dams plus a couple of bridges. Right now, even if you cut them, it would not change much because you have so much ground to cover. But if you are already aiming at limited offensive to complete your advance on Donetsk, then you can go full monkey around it. And indeed, you could justify in some way a victory in 2025 on the Russian side. It's going to be both a Pyrrhic and partial victory when it comes to what I think should be done, because you could still have a huge chunk of the Dnipro and Samara River that are going to be probably discussed as either a demilitarized zone or as a border for the Russians. So basically, that is going to stop with the buffer zone on the Dnipro River, then Samara River, Novomoskovsk, and then up to the E105 highway that goes around towards Kharkiv, Krasnograd, and then again a part of Izium is going to be demilitarized, Lozove, Bervinkove, Blizunki. So if you see it well, I really understand more or less what the Russians are going to request if it goes to that point. But it's going to be a lot less than a lot of people thought was going to be asked, and it's still going to remain southeastern Ukraine. So basically, I'm going to make a post right now about what I think are going to be the bargaining arguments. The current oblasts, so Luhansk, Donetsk, a huge chunk of Zaporozhye, if not all of Zaporozhye, beyond the Dnieper. So basically, half of the city is going to be probably a demilitarized zone and an access point towards Ukraine. Then a demilitarized zone around Dnipro with Pervomaiske, I think, as a buffer. And then we're going to go up towards the Samara River, access point to Novoselivka, access point to Novomoskovsk, huge demilitarized zone behind the Samara River. And I think that the Ukrainians are not going to allow the Russians to get more chunks of the Kharkiv Oblast, but they're going to have to demilitarize or vacate all the area between Lozove and the Donetsk Oblast, Barvinkov and Donetsk Oblast, and then, of course, Izium and Donetsk Oblast. So, and then we're going to have the Oskil River, I think, as a current border, be that demilitarized or Russian, I'd say, ground. And then, as I said, this puts a lot of stress on Kharkiv, because the Oskil River as the line, and then the Seversky Donetsk as a counter line, make it extremely easy for the Russians to swoop in if they want later on to occupy that part, and then put the Russians back again to Chuiv and put Kharkiv at a huge disadvantage. And given how the Ukrainians have huge problems to recover what they lose this year, it's going to be even worse next year. So I ended up giving my view on what the Russians going to ask once the operation in Donetsk is done. And I know that a lot of people are not going to be okay with it because they think that it's still leaving a huge chunk of eastern Ukraine into the hands of Kiev. There is this joke that every time that the Minsk agreement happens, Russia gains more ground. So maybe that's the whole point here. It's still sad that I don't think the Russians are going to ask for Kherson back because I already explained Kherson is literally asking to get surrounded and destroyed. They are probably going to ask for Kherson to be demilitarized, and the boundaries of the Kherson Oblast on the other side of the Dnieper. But that means also that Mykolaiv is still under Ukrainian control, which makes it, of course, crucial to not losing Odessa. Even the Russians ask for demilitarization of Odessa, it's not going to happen, for sure. I don't think ever that the Ukrainians are going to leave Odessa. It has really become a symbol. But so far, if we stop here, I would say that for the effort, the Russians would probably have managed a rather solid victory, redimensioned from what everybody was expecting. But you cannot have everything. However, I wouldn't go to the table negotiations for that ground without doubling the losses on the Ukrainian side. So then it's completely understandable that the timeline for the Russian Ministry of Defense is 2025, somewhere around the month of June. If things keep going this trend, it would be extremely difficult for Ukraine to replace 2,500 vehicles every 10 months. And I think it would be easier for the Russians to replace 4,000 vehicles every 10 months. That's my opinion once again. So yeah, that's what is was it, guys. Now it's open for the questioning and follow up. Thank you. You may ask to intervene, please. Go on, Snake. Hey, man.
I mean, as I sort of pointed out to you before, but we have slightly different understandings of what the Ukrainian elite is or wants to do. And for me, I think there's a possibility of an upside scenario, and that the situation deteriorates very rapidly on the Ukrainian side to the point where you do see maybe the timeline that you have being pushed forward for a while, because the thing that I kind of wonder is we are getting into a kind of political season in the U.S. and basically the closer you get to next year's elections, the less and less likely any kind of accommodation can be made. So if there is an upside scenario where Russia is actually moving forward and actually doesn't accomplish more of its objectives faster timetable, then we are actually seeing a like a less, I guess, Pyrrhic settlement in sometime in 2025 or even perhaps 2026. It's just I feel like the U.S. has to get over the political overhang of the 24 elections before any like reversal in course can be made. And we're getting to the point, right, where primary season is about to start. We're getting to the point where they can't actually be visibly backing off. And they would be giving Ukraine a lifeline that's shitty and starvation level, but that's like for somebody like Zelensky and people around him, that's enough of a lifeline to give them hope to keep them trying. I mean, of course, this is just an argument over degrees. Of course, we don't disagree fundamentally, but this is just like an upside scenario I want to present to people.
Well, to be honest, I would agree with you, but you know how I work. You know that I'm extremely pessimistic when it comes to timelines, mostly because I was burned. I've been burned last year. I thought that some things could have been solved earlier on the Russian side, but I think that the Russians would be also very happy to just sustain the grinding machine. So for me, uh, although we probably like the mass of the Z sphere, all the Zegros literally aren't very fond of our Tuvan baboon, but on that one I trust him because, and we were together first to see this. Yeah, it looks slumber. Yeah, it looks not what we're expecting. Yeah, it looks underwhelming. But things are going forward for the Russian side, slowly, fast, whatever. And I agree with you. It's very possible that if the Russians just start pressing, the way we saw in Advivka, by the way, Advivka, nobody was expecting the Russians to throw 100, 150, 200 vehicles at once at the assault because, remember, Russia has no reserves. And those assaults, we beat them 100%, everything fine. And then 2 weeks later, Butuzov comes like, oh shit, we may be losing the city. So once again, I agree with you. It's very possible that we are not seeing the reality of the Ukrainian situation on the back line. And on that, I wanted to speak about the 6 extra territorial defense slash reserve slash NATO-shaped brigades that are being presented from the 144 to 155, I think. 55th, sorry. And yeah, those guys, they are nowhere to be seen. They're supposed to be like in ship shape since like September, October. And I agree with you. There's a huge possibility that we are underestimating the damage that the counter has done on Ukraine. But once again, I know you're not going to like it, but I prefer to be extremely pessimistic and cautious about what's going on. And I also have this idea, as you said, politically. Maybe, if the Russians are fast enough, they create these situations where Biden loses face, especially around Avdiivka. If Avdiivka falls, and we have this propelling force of the Russian side pushing them 200 to 300 square kilometers away, and having almost a free range to now go and shit on Konstantinovka, and then repel them from Bakhmut, then indeed it's going to look extremely badly for the American so-called strategy, and it can go both sides. So in one side, we have the Americans pushing the Ukrainians for at least a tactical pause, or for a bigger truce, which could very well become the fundamentals for a Astana on steroids or whatever. A big part of it would also depend on how well the Biden administration is going to move around the current Middle East crisis, because, and on that one, I think we see the situation exactly the same. On long term, this crisis is just going to make babies. This one was a big one for Israel. They lost a lot of people. They're going to keep losing people. But the humiliation factor for Israel on this one is so big, so huge, that the only answer for them is to do something terrible. And this is what they're doing. And on that part, I think we both see where this is going for the Western way of doing things, seeing things. But the biggest situation, I'm gonna let you reply. The biggest situation is when it's gonna stop. If this starts making babies, that they stop the situation now within 2-3 weeks, but in another month they got Hezbollah on the other side starting to do shit. This refocus might play a huge role. Go on, man. I'm really sorry. I was a bit long.
Right. I mean, the other thing is like there is like very little awareness of like of Ukraine geography among the American public and all among American like media classes in general. So in this, I just want to point out that the level of cope as the cope narrative has shifted. Like basically since a few months ago, the new cope narrative is that we have a frozen conflict or stalemate. But the thing about stalemate is like if you look at the map of Ukraine, like the relative like movement of both armies has been very small, and I feel like you have to move the front like 80 to 100 kilometers back to the west until like people start wondering, hey, maybe this is not a stalemate. Because until then, like it does seem like Ukraine is so vast, and as far as like the American public and American like media class is concerned, like it's not that much of a concern. If you lose a few more Donbass cities, it's like you're just moving the trench lines back 50 kilometers, 80 kilometers. Is like in the American sense of distance here. I'm just saying, like you just can't make people panic over losing Avdiivka or even Slavyangrad. Like you can't. There won't be. I don't think there will be that level of panic. There will be that level of panic if there's a second Kharkov, or a second, or base, or or either Sumy gets like threatened again or something. When you shift the front hundreds of kilometers, then people start panicking. But so far, if it's just the Donbass, like Russia could probably advance like 100 kilometers before people start wondering, hey, maybe this is not a stalemate.
Yeah, but that's the thing. If Russia moves 100 kilometers, then you're not on a stalemate, and that's the the reverse Uno that we saw. Remember that Russia lost something that, honestly, let's be really honest, nobody gave a fuck about Kharkov. Not because the Russian nationalists considered it as a Russian city, but nobody gave a fuck about Kharkov because strategically Kharkov is a game-ending move. And that's why I agreed with you when you say going back to Kiev is going to probably end the war, put them into this frenzy. But the thing is, once again, that for me is going to be an apotheosis. That's how you just made the whole game. To get there, Sumy, Kharkov, Kiev, whatever, you first need to completely be sure that Ukraine have no more claim on Donbass. And this is the whole point. Smart people see things coming, and that's why I think we're discussing together. But if Ukrainians start to cope that, oh, it's nothing, we just fucking lost the whole fucking cause of this war. Oh, let's keep going because Kliati Orki and so. I mean, like this view works only for people who are unaffected, like the idiots who are on NAFO side, the grifters like Massara, and all these people. But when you think what they're going to lose, if they lose the whole Donetsk region and the whole Donbass, they completely killed Dnipropetrovsk as it stands right now. Dnipro is becoming what Nikolaev became during the Kherson campaign. Basically a ghost city. Kherson hasn't been fucking reinstated. So all these things have this, I know that I'm not going to try to school you, quite the contrary, but my point of view is that all those things that we are saying right now, if you want to kill the war, for sure, it will have to be Kharkov, a new northern incursion, or going back to Kiev. But that's the last move you make to make sure that whoever is at the helm of the Ukrainian state goes and signs the fucking paper. But you cannot do that. Once again, you cannot do that if you don't go to the limits, the boundaries of the oblast that you're supposed to annex. And there is, I think, people who are okay. I know that I'm speaking about Arestovich a lot, but he's a mouthpiece for people within the administration That guy is just the tool that everybody uses to vent their anger or to test waters against Zelensky. Or even worse, Zelensky uses him as as a puppet, as a puppeteer. Is the other hand who is supposed to like show that there is opposition and so on. The reality is that a lot of people in Ukraine in this war were profiting from the situation in Donbass. Donbass was a gray area for both Russia and Ukrainians, and that is how for so long crucial things haven't been blown up. Advivki coke plant, a lot of remote plants and storages in Dnipropetrovsk that were attacked a couple of times just to make sure that the Ukrainian side understands that the Russians are serious in this war slash negotiation. And once again, I have that's what I usually say. My biggest scare or reserve is that the more we advance in this war, the more I can see where it's going, and the slower it goes towards there, but it still goes towards there. The more I'm like, there is still an open negotiation. We don't see it, we don't feel it, but both sides are doing it. Because there is no way that a smart guy like Siersky is stupid enough to stay put in Bahmut for 5 fucking months and literally throw away his counter. I mean, I know that I mock them as brain dead people, but come the fuck on. Okay, Zaluzny, the guy is probably the 10 times worse than the Russian tandem. He literally looks at me as a fucking drug kingpin, a African general or stuff like that, because everything he says dumb shit. He's been caught multiple times with hookers. He's been given favors to lowlifes and all this shit. So on that part, Ukraine is literally a banana republic. We don't have a problem with that. I think we can both agree on that. But on the Russian side, okay, banana republics with nukes if you want. On the other side, the change in the war mechanic is so slow yet so fundamental that I cannot believe that nobody in Ukraine is going to understand. And once again, I agree with you. Going up north back again is a game-ending move for Ukraine, because it means that Russia has the material, the manpower, and the ammunition to spare to go back at places where it had failed before. And the only the optics of that would just put everything into question. Are we winning? Are we the baddies? You know what I mean? But in this case, I think the Ukrainian leadership or whoever is behind Zelensky, the moment they see that line in Donbass going away, they would have to rethink the whole strategy. And I told you why. You tried in Zapo, it failed. Now you have to try a second counter in Donbass. You lost between 150 and 200,000 people as irrecoverables, killed, maimed, paused, missing, abroad. Where are you going to find double that for 2 more failures? You see? And this is my point of view. For as long as I understand the mentality within the Ukrainian leadership. You may go on, man. Go on.
Well, I mean, this is as I said, we have a slightly different understanding of the Ukrainian leadership because, like, if you look at the Ukrainian Duma side, I mean, what they're saying is like the guys in Kiev are completely out of touch. You know, the Kiev itself is basically like Zelensky's own private kingdom, where the war doesn't happen, everything's fine, Ukraine's going to win, and everybody endlessly copes. Like, hey, if we just lose one more town, it doesn't matter. It's just the Donbass. I mean, I don't think we disagree in this, because what I'm saying is, like, by Russia creeping to the Donbass, like, it won't actually raise a crisis as, say, like the game-ending move, like going back to Kiev. It's just, I think both in Kiev and in the West, like this, at the end of the Donbass would just be like, they will cope by still saying the stalemate. And only after that, then they'll begin thinking for real. I mean, basically, this is where my slight sort of alteration of the mental model.
No, to be honest, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. To be honest, I actually agree with you. I'm just, in the sense, also playing the devil's advocate, in the sense that I gave it up. I think I also posted into the thread that you made over that. I mean, why would you go and kick someone out of his house if you have the kids, the money, the wife, and the car? But where I agree with you 100% is that he's going to still be a beggar. And so you need to kick him out of his house in order to impose your rules, because you still leave this uh, um, decorum around him. And I completely agree with you. But in my sense is that we have also to see what the Russians want, because the major dynamic factor of this war, again now after like 5 months of rather uh, taking it, are the Russians again. And that's why I did also this space to say to people that everybody who's still coping about the counter is ongoing. They lost the initiative again. Ukrainians lost it again. So the cope with, I'm agreeing with you, they're going to cope about, it's a stalemate, yeah, the Russians advanced 100 kilometers. I completely agree with you, and uh, those who need to cope will always cope. I mean, we had, remember, we had the first 2 months when then some American officials said, "Oh, we were expecting 3 weeks for them to be in Melitopol after we gave them the cluster ammunition." Remember, we laughed about that. Of course, you remember. So on that part, I agree with you. There is always going to be something to spoil the Russian victory, even if strategically you and I can both see where it's going, and I agree with you on that aspect. But I would still remain. I would still remain firm to the point that while Kiev might end it officially, or Kharkov might end it officially, Arestovich said something very nice about Kharkov, by the way, which uh, needs to be admitted. If Kharkov goes the way we see it, in the sense that it becomes the stump of Ukraine, because basically Kharkov was a gate towards and from Russia, Kiev is not very far behind it, man. It's up north. It's 80 kilometers from the Russian border. Actually, and you said that first. People need to know this. That actually, it says the perfect layout for a move within Ukraine from the north and northeast towards the west. And the more Kharkov gets de-energized, the more Kharkov becomes a stump, the more Zhytomyr starts to gain importance, Lviv, of course, and Kiev becomes literally a border city. It becomes the province, because Kiev was very important given that it went into Belarus and to Russia. But now, when you see who is going to pay for Ukraine, it's right there, man. It's Lviv. Closer to Warsaw, closer to Krakow, closer to Slovakia, closer to Hungary, closer to Romania. Actually, and I'm going to agree with you, and even go further, that Russians going for Kiev makes all this vision for some Ukrainian nationalists all the better. Lviv is easier to defend. You got the Polish border like 10 minutes away, I think. Okay, let's not exaggerate, about half an hour. So I perfectly understand what you're saying, and in a sense, Lviv makes perfect sense in what some Ukrainians want from Europe, from the US. So I completely agree with you on that aspect. I just think that the realization the war is lost as it stands, especially when you see the highways, is when indeed Kiev is visited again, or where Kharkiv is visited again. And it's very telling that you can see the highways within Ukraine. Very, very few lines on the eastern part, and the connection is literally Kiev, Kharkiv, and Dnipro, Kharkiv, with Poltava being somewhere there in the middle. But when you see on the western side, you can see the highways going from Lviv, Ternopil, Kelmensky, Zhytomyr, Kiev. It's like completely understandable, and I think that at the end, the cope that you're saying, given how the part of the Western Ukrainian mentalities can very well play that role in that. The fact that even if they lose the the Donetsk Oblast and Lugansk Oblast, at the end we still have Kharkiv, we still have enough strategic room to play around, because that's, I think, how they're going to start treating Eastern Ukraine from now on until Kiev, more or less. So yeah, guys, if you want to intervene, up to you. I'm going to add one little last thing. As you may know, the Ukrainians have an understanding with the Romanians for the use of a airfield next to Feteshti, where they're going to start the training on the F-16s. I think it's a very bad development for the war. Once again, bad in the sense that I can see what they're going to do initially for the F-16s until they are completely, I'd say, free to use them. I think they're going to move from Feteshti towards Sevastopol. And the first strikes are going to depart from NATO bases. So basically, going to depart from Feteshti, cross the border Ismail, and then strike from somewhere around Snake Island towards Sevastopol. And that's about 300 kilometers. So they can use GSO, whatever long-range weapon that could be provided with those. They can also do a cap patrol with the possibility, if they come around the Cape Mayak to Olenivka, they can stay about 60 kilometers from there and start hitting Skadovsk, or start trying to interdict flights around Yevpatoria, which are used to bomb Kherson with guided weapons. Those are going to be the first trials. If they get caught, so if they get shot down, I think is going to lead into a problematic situation, and I think that could escalate in the sense that it's going to be very difficult to hide the provenance of those planes. And I'm also very scared that to avoid them getting shot down or destroyed on the ground in Ukraine, that practice is going to be used as a overloading factor. Because I would had expected, for instance, for them for training to be as far as possible somewhere in Zamosk or in Lublin, and then they could just like fly at their ease because they're far away from Russian AD and Russian cap. But the fact they are present right there literally shows that they're gonna try a quote unquote provocation, which honestly would also allow them to gain altitude, because, as you know, this is the biggest problem for the Ukrainian jets within Ukraine. They cannot get into altitude in order to lob their weapons, especially AA. If they gain altitude within Constanza and then overfly into Ukrainian airspace, then they are going to solve around the Black Sea that situation. once again, this would be a co-belligerency, and I don't know how, if it's caught, of course, because that's also the thing. They need to catch them not only with telemetry and shit like that. It needs to be caught with satellites and stuff like this. So if they're caught, we are into something extremely dangerous, because legally the Ukrainians would be a co-belligerent, and so the Russians could perfectly strike back. Of course, this would go beyond the simple calculus, and it could escalate into a NATO intervention, or at least a NATO backstrike. So I hope that this is just paranoia for me, but knowing who is who behind this, I'm pretty sure it's going to happen. And the only solution would be for the Russians to have a cap right outside of the Snake Island ready. And yeah, it's going to be air combat. Thank you, guys. If anyone wants to intervene over it, feel free. I think I'm going to cut it out for now. And as you may have understood by this, I may, again, for some reason, do spaces, although this account technically cannot, because it's supposed to be at least 14 years old, and it's not. So, yeah, thank you very much, guys, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.